Welcome. I'm Mary Long. I'm going to take my glasses off. I always forget that. Light hits up. And today on Her Story Network, we have Siri Strommen, the pastor of
Atonement Lutheran.
Lutheran Church in Bloomington, Minnesota. Happy to have you back, Siri, as always. Thank you for joining us. So we have a lot to cover. I'm trying to get this down. We did have an election last night. And thank God, women's right to choose their own health care and their right to decide whether or not they want to give birth to a child and become mothers. People did uphold that. A few weeks ago, we got a new Speaker of the House who says, if you want to know anything about him, just read the Bible. A little scary, 2 steps away from the presidency. But here's what I want to talk about. I get it. There's a lot of people that are very scared today, that are very worried, that are in tears over what's happening to our country. I get that. I was that. I understand what it's like to be entrenched in the dogma of religious teachings. I get that. It comes from a very good place. It comes from a place of tradition. It comes from a place of desire to be a better person, comes from a desire to please this God in the sky that we're taught from the time we're born is there watching over us, also judging us, kind of loves us unconditionally, except. Right? So right. I do understand, and I've said this, and I'll probably say this a million other times on different shows. Sometimes I am too cavalier and dismissive of traditional religious beliefs. And I apologize for that because I know how important, I know how scary it is for people. I know when I started being led away just from my own insides, which I think is how it happens, being led away from traditional religion and questioning a lot of it. It was very scary because when your foundation is traditional religion, and you think you're being a very good girl and doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, and that ship starts rocking, it's very scary because what do you hold on to? I put forth that as women, we hold on to each other and we start talking to each other and giving voice to these concerns, these beliefs we've been fed and questioning them. That's my biggest goal, is questioning them.
Yeah.
And what I know more than anything is traditional religion is very, it's very connected, we've said this before, with the patriarchy, but also it rules by fear.
Yep.
Fear, be afraid of this, be afraid of them, be afraid of that. Because if you're afraid, you're very controllable.
Yep.
And all the people in charge, most males in charge of major religions, certainly the religion I grew up in, they have a whole town that's only men, and these are the rulers. And we have a progressive Pope, Catholicism, somewhat progressive, but has come right out and said women will never serve as priests. So there's that. Yeah. But anyway, the foundation of these religions is patriarchy and fear. And it struck me because I was reading, going through Facebook, and a woman was on there that I've known my whole life. And I've watched her progression into, I talked to her many, many years ago, and I saw her fears and doubts, and she was like, I did everything right, and her marriage was falling apart. She wasn't happy. She had this job. And I've watched her progression into the net of strict religion again. And I get that, because when you're afraid, you want answers, and religion has them. Do this, do that, do this, do that. And there was a post around Halloween, and she talked about how there's spells on the Halloween candy that the evil people are giving the children. So pray over your candy to bless the children. And I was like, oh man, I remember, so I get this. When my son was little, he was into He-Man.
Yeah.
That was the devil. That was like in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot. It's like everything old is new again. Again, this resurgence of people putting spells, which is witchcraft, spells on candy the kid's going to eat. Bless the candy. I think it's a great idea. You should bless everything you eat. That's always a good idea, but it's kind of interesting. The attack on women, quieting women, controlling women. What's the best way to control them? Our physical bodies. Think about that. That's what's happening. They've sold it as you're saving the babies. That's not what it's about. It's about men who will never be in your position deciding what medical decisions you should make for your own life. And I would like to propose that if this was a really important topic, as important as religion makes it, especially Christian religions. I don't really know that much about other religions, but Christian religions certainly have used this as a political talking point. I feel like Jesus might have mentioned it.
Right.
I feel it honestly, and it's the same with homosexuality. I have this paper here. It's addressed to my mother. My mother was very Catholic, so she prescribed to all these. And it says, inside the transgender empire. And it talks all about how the transgenders are taking over. Again, fear, fear, fear.
Yeah.
Now, truthfully, the transgender population is somewhere between 0.5 and maybe 1.5 of the entire population.
Right.
But it's an empire. It's taking over. And the whole article is about how they're grooming your children and deforming them, by mutilating them, by changing. None of this is happening. What is happening is traditional religion over the past few decades is losing more and more people, because people more and more are saying, I don't want to be controlled, and this doesn't make sense to me. And hopefully, as what happened to me, we're discovering God, if you want to call it that, or they're a spirit that is so loving and beautiful and unconditional. It's nothing like this mob boss God that runs Christian churches.
Right.
So you are a learned theologian. You have studied, and I'm curious about this too, Siri, because I know in the Catholic Church, and certainly the separation of church and state has gone out the window pretty much. I know in the Catholic Church, they're telling the parishioners who to vote for. So that's out the window. I'm wondering, does the Lutheran Church or other churches have these hard stances on abortion and transgender as the Catholic Church does? Is it a Christian thing or is it a Catholic thing? What is the teachings in these other Christian religions?
Yeah. So the one thing I want to say is that when I was in seminary, I spent exactly 0 minutes talking about abortion in any of my classes, because it is not very biblical. It is not a huge theological point in the history of the church. This is a recent thing that people have decided to make a really big deal about. And we do know that it is politically motivated, just like the war on drugs is politically motivated. People have fessed up to saying that. In the Lutheran Church, the ELCA, we have talked a lot about many different social issues, and basically have come out and said, you know, when it comes to sexuality, it is not this, God is not this puritanical person that we want things to be. Like, sexuality is so much more than what we have allowed it to be. If we look scientifically, they're understanding this, sociologically, psychologically, as we're really looking at it and starting to put away preconceived notions and just seeing what is and what has been, we're seeing that in the animal world, as well as in human societies, that things have been varied in sexuality forever. And that is actually sort of part of the diversity of the world. We don't tell people what to do in the church. That's the nice thing about Lutherans, is that they'll come out with social statements, but most Lutherans just ignore them. They don't even know. They don't care, because Lutherans are like, you can't tell me what to do. That's like the whole premise of Lutherans. But we do we do spend time talking about these social issues, gender, sexuality, abortion, racism, poverty. We talk about this and have these very lovely statements that try to guide us towards a faithful and a compassionate perspective. And a lot of the conversation that we have about sexuality in the world is not compassionate and not educated. In fact, that when you start to bring up statistics or you start to bring up people's personal experiences, everybody just automatically wants to go right to, well, no, my faith teaches me. It's not, and that's the hard part, is because in religions and religious groups that are very controlling, they do say, hey, this is what the Bible says, or this is the way God ordained it, right? So all of a sudden, if you question anything, you're going against God, you're going against the Bible, you're going against the church. And who wants to do that? But the truth is, you start to question and poke holes in that and really read the Bible and really look at things, and you realize that it's not true. It's not true. In researching this topic and looking at abortion, for example, most of the articles religiously were from conservative people, and they were really working hard to find biblical evidence for their perspectives. And I was reading through it and going, they're really trying to make something out of very little, because they can't stand the thought that maybe things are a little bit more gray, and always have been and always will be. And what would it mean if God allows us to live in the gray without massive punishment, shame, guilt, and fear? As you said, you're right, it would make us a lot less controllable.
And if you can control people, you can get their money, you can get their loyalty, you can do whatever you want, and they'll just accept it. And religion is it's a very touchy thing because it's so personal. And we do want to be good people, and we want to get approval from this God we've been trained that lives in the sky, which is interesting because Jesus said God lives inside of us and that we are all God's and that we can do even greater things than he did. We don't really talk about that. Nope. All we talk about is these arbitrary rules, which, as you said, it wasn't a big deal. And it wasn't a big deal until the very conservative arm of politics realized that people were evolving. The 60s really blew things wide open for women, for minorities, people of color, all of that. And the people in charge, which are pretty much the white men, have always been in charge in this country, at least, did not like that. And they knew as time passed, they would not be able to win the popular vote because the population was evolving. Their minds were expanding. They were becoming more accepted and open, less controllable. So that's when the moral majority started. I think it was Jerry Falwell, right? The moral majority, because people want to be spiritually superior. I get it. I have been down there too. And it's very interesting. I remember in a meditation one time, something was going on. I was on the spiritual weekend anyway. And I was, meditating and asking this question. And the answer I got in meditation was, be very aware when spiritual superiority masquerades as concern. And that's what it is, right? We care about, but deep down, we really feel superior to you, which is why most every religion needs to convince other people to believe what they believe.
Yep.
Why is it that we can't just say, this is what I believe, and it brings me such peace and happiness? And, I'm here. If you want to ask me about what I believe and how I found this peace and happiness within, I would be happy to tell you. But I have no desire to bang you over the head with what I believe, let alone the Bible, which, can we just say now, I know you know this because you studied it. When people say, I follow the Bible, it's in the Bible. Okay, well, the Bible was not written by God. It was written in 4th century, 3rd century. Constantine was a pagan. He was in power. He did not want to lose his power. Christianity was on the uprising. He was like, holy shit, I better make a book and act very Christian so they don't throw me off the throne. So he put, and very cherry picked during a very patriarchal time, what would be in there and what wouldn't. Left out the Gospel of Thomas, Mary Magdalene, anything that was closer to the truth of what Jesus taught, and pretty much just kept in the things that supported their views of patriarchy. So I am not a learned theologian as yourself, but is it not true that this, I believe, stake my life on the Bible is great. You stake your life on a book that was very cherry picked by a very patriarchal group of people, and it was about money and power.
Yeah,
Correct?
and it's not even that. I mean, it's a lie. It sounds good. There's a lot of things that sound good. There's no such thing as a Bible believing Christian. It's a lie. Because if you believe in the Bible, you believe in an idol. It is not God. It's not the same as God. The Bible has so much in it. And yes, there are contradictions in the Bible because the people in the Bible evolved. Things shifted. Things that were said at the beginning of the Bible are undone later and undone again by Jesus. You're ignorant to say there's no contradiction in the Bible. Of course there are. And so what Martin Luther, I love that he said this. He said, because the Bible is so complex, you need a lens in which to read it. And his perspective was the lens is if it doesn't match up with God so loved the world that, God so loved the world that, then it's not really that important. So you read a horrible passage in the Old Testament about, bash the babies of your enemies against the rocks. Does that match up with God so loved the world that? No, then it's not something that we need to adhere to. And there's a lot in the Bible that could be categorized as less important, more important, specific to that culture, universal. It takes a mature human being to see how complex the Bible is. And for you to say, if you want to know who I am, look at the Bible. Well, which part? Which part? The only people I think who see that and swoon are people who actually haven't read the Bible. Like if you say, I try to follow the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, now I'm interested. If you say what frames my life is the story of the prodigal son, now I'm curious. If you say to me the most important story is the story of Jesus going to a 12-year-old girl and raising her up, or whatever it is, that's curious. But to somehow say you live by the Bible, so when your wife's menstruating, she's in a red tent, you don't wear fibers of mixed clothing. Which part? Like it's so
and isn't there
ignorant.
something, if someone's husband dies, they have to marry the brother or
Yeah.
something in there too? Yeah, there's all kinds of crazy stuff in there.
Well, the entire Old Testament, polygamy was normal. It was absolutely normal. There are men who go and have sex with prostitutes in the Old Testament, and it's never questioned as an immoral thing. It's just a normal thing, guys writing about what guys did back then. And I think a lot of Christians today would say that that's not what they would consider to be very moral. So yeah, it's a lot of times in conservative Christianity, they'll put forward certain statements and beliefs that sound good. But the minute you start poking holes in them, they have a lot of issues. We talked about the woman's right to choose and abortion. And yeah, it's very convenient and easy to go, oh, don't kill the babies. Honey, nobody on the planet wants to kill babies. There isn't a single person I've ever met that wants to kill a baby. It is so much more complex than that. The ability to look at an issue in a complex and empathetic way, it doesn't make it easy anymore. It makes it complex. But we are to be empathetic and to be a society that can care for each other in the best way. We would be empathetic. I mean, the Bible says if a woman's caught in adultery, she should be stoned to death. So they bring a woman before Jesus to have a little bit of, revenge porn. And he says, no, she's cool. She's fine. And the men walk away and he forgives her. And so again, this moral superiority. I like that you said that. This feeling of, I follow the Bible, I believe in this and I believe in that, but without being willing to listen to the stories of pain, the stories of people who've been crushed by, the stories people who've been left out of. We have to have a faith that's mature enough to look at all of the complexity, all of the inconsistencies, all of the pain, and wrap it around that. And if we can't, it's not good enough. It's not good enough.
You know, I find it so interesting. What I see happening with Christianity today is really an adherence to the Old Testament. It's
Right.
not Jesus's teachings at all. Jesus did not say judge people, condemn them, put
No.
up borders. He didn't say any of those things.
Mhm.
He said, go off by yourself and pray.
Mhm.
He mocked those that dressed in the gold robes and stood before the crowds and said, you know, I will tell you what God wants you to do. He said, no. And my belief, you know, people say, we were taught God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son, which is psychotic. Imagine as a parent that you say, I love my other kids so much, I'm going to let this one be tortured and murdered.
Exactly.
It's so nuts. But in that time, they believed in blood sacrifice. So rather than say, this incredibly enlightened being came and he told us to love our enemies, he treated women as equals. He talked about love, and our own empowerment to stop giving our power away and looking for others to lead us. He told us to go inside ourselves and connect with our own hearts, minds, and souls and let that lead us. And we said, screw that.
Yep.
I'm not doing any of that. It's too hard. Let's keep believing in the God Daddy in the sky who says what's right, who says what's wrong. And, you know, even as women, we have to take some responsibility here, because I do get this in a way. We suffer greatly under this patriarchal view and the religious views, but also we kind of skirt a lot of responsibility because we could just say, well, I'm not in charge. I know so many women, they've never had to keep a roof over their heads or put food on the table for them or their children or anything. And that's kind of nice. I know women who spend their lives on vacation and are living an amazing life through the men in their life. They were supported by their fathers, husbands, whatever. You know, it's kind of cushy. That's kind of nice. Maybe let's keep the status quo. I can get that. But that is much rarer than the women who are suffering under this patriarchy. And I always think, like, what are we missing? We don't even know what we're missing, what women could be if they were truly allowed equality. And whenever I bring this up, people are like, well, what do you mean? What do they not have? I can't even have that conversation if people are not willing to acknowledge that women are definitely, we're not paid as much. We're not, what are the CEOs? We're like 10% of CEOs in any places of power. It's definitely the majority of men. So we need to look at that, and we need to look at how we've been so well trained to think of ourselves as bad and less than, that we take part in this. We encourage it. Think about my Catholic Church, okay? We, first of all, the people in charge have said, you are not equal, you cannot serve, and women serving on the altar is less sacred. It defiles the altar. Think about that. That's the thinking about us. Also, the people in charge, the priests, the popes, the bishops, the cardinals, for decades and decades, I would say centuries, but at least we can prove decades, allowed the sexual abuse of our children. Our children. Now, as mothers, think about this. The thought of someone harming your children, get out of my way, let me at them. But we have been so well trained to accept whatever our religion teaches us, that we still are supporting our churches. We're still sending our children to these churches. And there wasn't a come to Jesus. There wasn't a
Not really, no.
the boards. They've
No.
paid out some money. They've kept it quiet. There's still active pedophiles in our church.
Mhm.
What a great place to be for a pedophile. Easy access to children, absolutely no accountability.
Mhm.
Of course, it just keeps going and going. You will be completely protected. And if things get really hinky, we'll put you in our safe town in Rome where nobody can touch you. As women, as mothers, we should have walked away from this church in droves and said, this is it. You're going to abuse our children? No. But we're still there, still supporting it, still crossing ourselves, saying our rosaries, still washing the priest's garments. That's how ingrained it is in us to accept abuse, suffering, and give away our power. These people in power are doing this. So let's just pretend it's not happening because it's easier.
Yeah.
I just think it's easier to pretend these things aren't happening. And I think that's really unhealthy for us.
Yeah, I think that goes with a lot of things that are going on in the world in general. It's true of racism. It's true of what we did to the Native Americans.
Yep.
It's true of so many problems that we don't want to look at it. We don't want to look at it because it opens up questions we don't want answers to. And it makes people deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And I think you're right. Like those in power are never going to give up their power willingly. Why would they? It's working out swell for them. And so they've crafted a whole perspective, a whole religious perspective that has infiltrated our country and so many other places that rests upon a certain level of power and theology and authority and institution and biblical understanding that supports all of this. So that if you even have the thought to be able to question any one of those pieces, you're questioning the whole darn thing. And we have to be made aware. You can't envision something, or you can't make real something you can't envision. And I think even for women to envision a world where women are equal and to know what that's like is just hard enough. If people say women have equality to men right now, it just shows you how clueless we are, because there's so many stories of how that's not true. It's very clear from the experiences of women that the men still think it's a men's world and they're just allowing us to live in it. So there's a lot of work to do, but the fact that we can't see it just shows that all of us have been infected with misogyny. It's like a virus. And it's not our fault that we got this sick, but I do think that we need people to be the antidote. We need people to raise the issue. We need people to wake people up and to ask the questions and to reveal that this is not how it has to be. This was not the way, if you're speaking from a Christian perspective, this is not what Jesus envisioned at all. Look at his behavior with every single woman he encountered. He talked to women and treated women in a way that nobody did. And it was shocking to the disciples. He spoke to them as a complete equal and had conversations that no man would have had with a woman. He decided on purpose to go to a woman when he rose and said, you be the one to tell the world. You be the first Christian pastor in existence. And for the first 300 years, there were so many women who were leaders in the Christian church. People were making fun of the Christian church for being the church of women. But educated women were going to Christian churches because they actually had power there and could lead and could teach. And of course, that all changed in the 4th, 5th, 6th century and so on. That changed dramatically. But the early stages of Christianity was showing this radicalness. And we don't talk about this. In fact, people almost make it seem like you're doing something wrong by bringing up what's actually in the Bible. And by doing any kind of research to point this out, people are like, no, you're the wrong one. So you're right. We've had a number done on us and we're not there yet. And I do think that poking holes in these lies that religion has purported is really, really important. You know, I was doing a Bible study yesterday at my church, and we're reading all the little letters in the New Testament, just one through the other. And we got to 1 Timothy, and I'm just reading it, and I'm going, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. I don't believe it. This is this guy's letter to a community addressing a certain problem. We decided that he was speaking to all human beings at all time, and that this is the word of God, not this particular guy's perspective for this particular community. And it has harmed so many people, and I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I don't buy it.
Well, hopefully you're one of millions that stop buying the traditional teachings of religion, which are very anti-female, certainly Christian religion. But, well, you know, I know there's some that aren't, but like even Judaism, I can't think of some of the others, but most traditional religions are founded by men, run by men, and women are kind of, to varying degrees, servants.
Mm-hmm.
We're trained to be servants. And I find it interesting. Most of us have some kind of religious background.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I hear someone say, I was raised with no religious beliefs, I think, oh my God, you're so lucky, because you can go stuff. Seriously, like you don't have, like there's a lot of stuff I don't believe anymore, but it still is in my head because it's so surrounded by it. It was so ingrained in me. And the thing I think that's really important for women, first of all, we don't hate men. And I hate that we have to keep saying that. Anytime we talk about what life is like for women and how things need to be addressed, we're called man haters, which is another way of just dismissing us.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You just hate men, so don't listen to us. I love men.
Mm-hmm.
I've raised a man. I date men. I've been married to men. I do love men. Because I'm pro women waking up and seeing this kind of trance we've been in for so long, it doesn't mean I want to destroy men. I don't in the least. But there are things we need to look at. And for me, one of the most glaring examples, or a couple of them, that shows women are not equal to men is, first of all, when we get married, we take the man's name. Mm-hmm. That comes from the tradition of a man's wife and slaves and children all had his last names. That was because we were his property. That's how he identified his property. Mm-hmm. We were of the house of Jones. So I was Mrs. Jones, the slaves were of Jones' house. And think about that we actually believed that owning people at some point was okay. We believed that. So aside from that, we take the man's name because we're his property. And I always, God bless, when I see young girls, they're like so excited. Oh, I can't wait to get married and change my name. Okay. And we wonder why women, after their kids grow up, we have identity crises. Like we don't even know who we are anymore. We spent our whole life writing someone else's name, being someone else, raising children, and then that's it. That's the end of us. Hopefully, maybe we can become grandmothers. But we do the taking of the name. And the biggest one to me is to say that, people are like, well, I don't necessarily believe God is male or that there's no female or whatever. And I always say, okay, but what if instead of God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we started saying God the Mother, God the Daughter, God the Divine Spirit, or whatever? And people are like, oh, all right, that just sounds weird. That just sounds crazy. Or if you say goddess, they're like, goddess, it's a joke. We cannot equate. And I think we discussed this once before when Dan Brown's book came out, the Da Vinci Code, which insinuated, which actually there's kind of a lot of evidence that Jesus was actually married to Mary Magdalene, and people were up in arms that it was sacrilege. Think about that it made Jesus less holy, just the thought that he was married to a woman. Right. And I was having lunch with a group of women a few months back, and we were talking about a male that we knew whose wife had died, and he was going on dating sites now, and she was guiding him because her husband has died and she was on them. So she was telling us how, you know, he was asking about what should I put this, what should I put that? And she said, don't put you're a lawyer. And I said, why did you tell him not to put that? And she goes, because you know how women are. They're just going to look for the, and I was like, wow. I said, first of all, I don't agree with that, but what training? We are so trained to hate ourselves and think of ourselves as gold diggers. Even when women come forward and say, I've been sexually assaulted. Were you drunk? You're a gold digger. You're looking for money. We're so trained. We should be advocating for each other. We're out in this world. I don't know about you, but I could write a book on all the varying degrees of sexual inappropriateness, sexual assault, all kinds of stuff in the workplace, in school, different places I've been. But we still want to act like when women have the courage to come forward, especially if it's with a powerful man, we still doubt her because we are so trained to get approval from the men in our lives that we will stand by their side even when they are persecuting our sisters or us. We'll agree with them. That's how trained we are. It's mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's what it is it's really just a training, and having these conversations just can maybe trigger something in one woman and then another woman to just go, oh yeah, I do think that. Why do I think that? You know, why do I think that women, I remember hearing that, you know, two women couldn't be pastors together because they would just be catty. Like someone actually said that to me. And I worked with a woman pastor for a year and a half or 2 years, and it was a wonderful relationship. I really admired and respected her so much. There was no difference, you know, between anything else. In fact, she was really good at lifting up my voice and empowering me, whereas I usually had to work to tell the guys I was working with, hey, you're stepping on my toes, you're stepping on me. And they're like, what? I had no idea, you know. So there is just a lot of power to talking about this and just naming it and going, maybe you should re-examine that thought. I mean, I love to share this story. I've been working on these novels for quite a few years. It's a little fantasy set of novels I've been writing and self-publishing. And when I first started writing the earliest drafts, there's a group of people, and it's a matriarchy. It's a matriarchy, Mary. The head person is a woman, a priestess. And I had it that when she met with her council, the council was all men. And when I realized what I'd done, I was appalled. And I said, that just shows how deep the training is. I had a feminist mom. I had a feminist dad. We had a really liberal house. You know, I consider myself a feminist. And when I got writing the subconscious thing of men in leadership, and when I realized that, it became really fun to actively challenge and write these people in a way that would have people laughing while they read it and realize their own preconceived notions about, because their God is a woman, and they have almost reverse sexist beliefs. And it's funny to read the beliefs they have and the internalized belief that some of the men have from that community, where they just are like, well, of course women should be in charge, men can't be trusted, you know. And it just, so just challenge it, just talking about it and challenging it, realizing
movie.
what
The Barbie movie is like that. Did you see the
I
Barbie?
love the Barbie movie because
And
it
it's
was
kind of like that, where the
yes.
women were in charge of everything.
Then they did it so playfully and so thoughtfully to bring up deeply painful and entrenched ideas. And I thought it was a brilliant movie in that way. Yeah.
You know, the thing that I want to do the most, because like I said, I get it. You can't just go after people's deeply held beliefs. Those kind of evolutions, they really have to come from within. But what I really want women to do is to start asking questions.
Yes.
Start asking these questions. Why do I believe this? Why do I feel this? And like I said, if you look at things like the Bible or traditions, and that's what you're basing your belief system on, that's not, certainly not God or spirit or whatever that I've come to know in the past 20 years or so. That is beyond description, that the love and acceptance, there's no judgment. It's beyond anything. If you're curious at all, go on YouTube and look up near-death experiences, people who have gone to the other side and what they've experienced, and how some of them were either atheists or very traditional religion or whatever, and they found that there was no judgment, the love. Most of them don't want to come back. They're like, it's such love, such acceptance. So all these rules and regulations and judgments come from humanity. They do not come from divine creator or spirit or whatever. These are rules that men have decided we should follow because this is the way it is. And we have upheld those very much so. I was one of them. You know, when I was very enmeshed in my religion, I remember standing on the side of the road once with a pro-life sign. And it's interesting because they changed the language from anti-abortion, which wasn't working, to pro-life. Sounds better. Sure. It's the same way. They know how to do that. It's the same way that they used to have an estate tax, and people were voting that down because they wanted to pass a bill so rich people didn't have to pay taxes on their estates anymore. So what they did, they started calling it a death tax. Should you be taxed for dying? No, it's all language, how they change language to make it more palatable, and pro-life sounds so much better than saying we want to control women's reproductive system and their bodies. And we believe they should just be baby making factories and homemakers, and be very grateful to be in service to the men around them. And that's pretty much the core of it. I mean, there's a lot more, but the women I've seen that I know who have gone deep into religious territory in recent years, very much the men are the leaders of their houses. I see they post it. My husband is such a good leader. And, you know, you're a grown woman. Why do you need someone leading you? Why don't you listen to your own intuition? You have the best compass you could need right inside of you. I know it's scary. And like I said, I know sometimes I get too dismissive, and I feel bad about that because it's very scary right now. I get that. Things are so topsy-turvy, and we want to cling to what we know. For security, for safety. It's the same reason we stay in crappy relationships way longer than we should. It's what we know. It's so hard. We got to go through stuff to get out of it. But once we go through the stuff and we're in a healthier place, what do we say? Oh my God, I can't believe that I allowed myself to stay there, to be treated like that. And I believe humanity as a whole, certainly here in the United States, is going through that now. And I think women en masse in the very near future, I think there are beautiful times ahead, but I think we might have to go through some labor to give birth to this new phase of humanity. But I really do believe in the very near future, women are going to go, oh my God, I can't believe I allowed that. I can't believe I believed that. I can't believe I went along with that. My biggest red flag for women of how much abuse we allowed, how well we've been trained that abuse is acceptable for us is, I've said it before, I'll say it a million times, a man came forward 7 or 8 years ago and said, I sexually assault women. And he was running for president, and he was laughing about it. And the man he was saying laughed about it. And women that look like us voted in the millions, made excuses for him. Our sons, our daughters saw that. They watched that. And people are like, why are these kids acting up? I wonder why. I wonder why. Look at the example. We've got people in Congress wearing AR-15 pins on their lapels. I mean, there's so much craziness going on. And I keep the eye on the prize. I do believe we don't want to just regurgitate everything that's wrong. We want to stay positive, but we need to address what got us here. We need to address the beliefs that have kept us imprisoned and separated from the true divine, the core of who we are. And, it's kind of scary. It actually is very scary.
Mhm.
But like I said, I think if we can just talk about it, if women can support each other and say, I'm here for you, sister, I get it. The same way we are when we leave abusive relationships, we're there and like, you'll get through this. You'll get through this. You'll be in a better place. You just got to get through the pain. I do believe it's kind of the same as us breaking up with religion, or certainly finding a different way to maintain religion. For me, I can't. I don't want anything to do with traditional religion anymore. You are still in it, still in there, going to bat, which I love. That's why I love talking to you, because I know there's a lot of people like you too. And I believe we can build a bridge. There's a bridge we can find for the people who are comfortable still in religion, but want to turn that Titanic to a more equal and female, fair way of looking at things. And those of us who are like, I do not want to follow any traditional religion anymore, but I am so invested in making this world a more joyful, peaceful, accepting, equal place outside the confines of religion. I really believe those two things can coexist. And I think
Absolutely.
that they do.
Absolutely. And I guess what I will say is there's a huge difference between healthy religion and spirituality and unhealthy religion and spirituality, but we have not named that in the past. We haven't. It's just been religion. It's just been the church. And we haven't talked about how certain beliefs and certain doctrines and certain practices either free people to be more joyful, more alive, more full of hope, more full of the self that God made them to be, or they are kept in fear, guilt, and shame. And to me, that's the huge difference, is that unhealthy religion, I don't care what religion it is, if it uses control, fear, guilt, shame, authority, it's not healthy and it needs to fall apart. And it probably will eventually anyway. But finding healthy is you're allowed to question, you're allowed to learn to trust yourself, you're allowed to be open, there's freedom and room to play, there's guidance, not dictatorship, there's an openness, and you should feel more yourself by going through that process, whatever it is. And I'm with you. I think I have way more in common with atheists and Buddhists and Hindus who want to create a thriving, happy world where all people feel safe and animals feel safe and nature is thriving. I have way more in common with those people than I do with some Christians who simply just want to pound the Bible and to pound you into submitting to a very narrow way of thinking. So if we can kind of separate the two, and then just help people to trust themselves, you are allowed. There is room for you to ask questions. There is room for you to have a little doubt and to wonder. And there's so much more. There's so much more.
I do agree with you. And that's certainly, once I stepped out of the confines of traditional religion, wow.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the God that I sought my whole life in traditional religion, I finally found outside of it, because I let go of all those rules and all that. And like I said, it's challenging. And I do want to come back and address this, because I have a habit of doing this, saying things that hurt people's feelings or insult, and I wasn't thinking. And so I want to say this, when I was addressing women who have never had to put food on their table or roof over their head or all that, good for you. If you're happy doing that, that's wonderful. But what I would say is, then refrain from judgment, because I do see women who have done that, who have a lot of opinions on women who have not had that luxury of being supported or all their lives. And so that's all I'm saying. We're all doing the best we can. We're living whatever lives we can. And if you're living your best life by being taken care of your whole life, oh, that must be wonderful. I think that all the time, man, that must be wonderful. But good for you. That's great. But just pay attention to your judgments of other women who have walked roads or are walking roads that you've never had to walk, that
Mm.
you've been so blessed and graced enough to
Mhm.
not have to wander down that road. The other thing is, and this is really important on the topic of abortion. So, late 70s, early 80s, that was my high school, coming of age, teens, 20s. Abortion, like I went to an all-girls Catholic high school and there was an abortion clinic like a block away. It wasn't even really that much of a thought. There were abortion clinics springing up all over. Roe v. Wade was passed in 73, I think, maybe. I might be wrong about that. But anyway, so then abortion clinics sprang up. I can tell you a few things. One is I went with several girlfriends to have abortions, teenage girls, of course, were in high school. None of them did it cavalierly.
No.
A lot of them I know to this day, and it's something that still they think about. Doesn't mean they think they made the wrong decision, but it's something that nobody makes, like, they're choosing what movie they want to see. It's not
Right.
like that's false. Nobody gives birth to an 9-month-old baby and kills it. That's a lie. None of that stuff happens. They use all this propaganda. None of that stuff happens.
Mhm.
I can tell you, I don't know that I ever thought about what I would do if I got pregnant. I don't know. I mean, it's not like I had this wild sex life. I mean, I was a teenage kid, so I didn't think about it, but I did get pregnant. Very young, at my senior prom. And so found out a few weeks after I graduated from high school that I was pregnant. So it's life-changing, obviously. I did not have to think a lot. There was nothing religious about it. I actually had a dream about my son before he was born. I met his father, was not attracted to him, went home that night, had a dream about my son, who was my son when he was 2 years old, looked just like him. And I said to my sister who had introduced me, I go, I had a dream that him and I had a baby. I go, maybe I'm supposed to pay more attention to him. That's how my son came to be, because he came to me in a dream and was like, hello, no, you're not that crazy about my dad, but just get together with him for a little bit so I can be born. And so he was, sincerely. But so it was just destiny. I knew I was going to have him. I always say, driving home from that doctor's appointment, I was in the car with my mother. I didn't tell her. I had no idea I was pregnant. I just went because I had a stomach ache. So she brought me to the doctor. Found out I was pregnant. And on the way home, I knew two things. I knew I was going to have that baby. I knew I was going to do it alone. I just knew that's how it was going to be. And I was so dedicated to him. I adored him. I was very lucky. My parents gave me a car. I got a great apartment. Back then I could, on my salary, I could work full time and support my child and all that. But I can tell you, it was really hard. I was 19, 20 years old, raising a baby by myself, working full time, paying bills, doing all these things while my, friends were doing bong hits at college. This is what I was doing. It was very hard, but it was my choice.
Yeah.
I knew in my soul, I wanted this kid and I was meant to have them. To force someone, especially a child, and I was a child, and a lot of these people are child, a 10-year-old girl that gets raped by her stepfather, being forced to give birth to a child because she's too young to make a decision about an abortion, but she's old enough to become a mother. It's insanity. It's absolute insanity. It has nothing to do with the sanctity of life. It has to do with the control of other people's bodies. And I ask you, if you are a believer, a religious person who believes that abortion is a sin, why you feel compelled to put your beliefs on other people. Because I have never read anything that says, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's in the Bible, which again, don't put much salt in that, but that says if someone else sins, you're going to be held responsible for it. I've never heard anything that says what someone else does, if that person decides to become a criminal, God is going to judge you as a criminal. So if that person decides to have an abortion and you're taught that it's a sin, why does that have anything to do with you? Why
Mhm.
do you feel compelled to put your beliefs on someone else? It has nothing to do with you,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Yeah. And I think that if we really want to prevent abortions, we can do what we know actually works, which is to have really good sexual education so kids know how their bodies work, to make contraception very easy for people, and to really look at the embedded messages of misogyny that we have about women getting pregnant, because there is this deep belief that if a woman gets pregnant, that she's a slut, that women should not like sex, that men cannot be controlled, and women are the gatekeepers of sexuality. They should be keeping their knees cemented together, no matter how hard men try to rape them. And if something happens, it's ultimately their fault, because women are supposed to be sexless, pure little virgins, and men are wild and crazy, sex-starved creatures who can't be helped. So therefore, it's all the woman's fault, and that's the deep message. I hear it a lot when people say, well, she got herself knocked up. How did she do that? Did she
Yeah,
do a
by
special?
herself.
Did she? Yeah, she went into the woods and she prayed, a weird thing to the full moon, and voila, she got herself pregnant. Like, never do we talk about the men. We never do, because we've been trained to ignore them. Their behaviors don't matter. They're not responsible for their actions. Women are responsible not only for their actions, but for the actions of men. And it's so unfair. It's so deeply, deeply unfair. And we need to name that and realize that women are allowed to have sex. They're allowed to have orgasms. They're allowed to enjoy pleasure with their bodies. God did not give sexuality only for reproducing babies. Otherwise, why do women get to have multiple orgasms? Like, right?
Not only that, but we have an organ that is only for sexual pleasure. Men don't
Yeah,
have. We
that's
have
right.
a clitoris or clitoris.
Exactly.
Nobody can seem to decide how to even pronounce it. That's how little we talk about it. But that is just for women's sexual pleasure.
Exactly.
And only
Thank
50 to
God.
75% of women have orgasms.
How much?
50 to 75% of heterosexual women have orgasms. 95% of heterosexual men do. But
Right.
but we're frigid. It's because of us, not because men have not been trained to pleasure women, or the domination that they've been trained to use on us, uh,
Yeah.
or how they're trained to stifle all their tender emotions.
Yeah.
None of that has any. It's because we're frigid. I mean, we're responsible for everything, aren't
Oh
we?
yeah, it's everything is women's fault. Nothing is men's fault. And no, I mean, we could go on and on, but ultimately, a lot of the conversation we have around abortion is tied in with our misogynistic beliefs that women shouldn't want sex, shouldn't have sex. They should just get married and then produce all the babies that their husband wants. And that's what they should want, because that's God ordained. But literally, look at human history and you look at what has happened, what is happening. It's never been that simple. It's never been that simple. And why would God, if something was God ordained, why would there be so many people who feel deeply like they want more, like they want something else? Why do men have to work so hard to tell women every single Sunday in the pulpit what they're supposed to be doing if it was natural? You shouldn't have to work that hard. So clearly what's natural, we haven't actually really fully discovered, because we've been putting each other in boxes for too long.
Yeah, I think that's the path we're on. I really do believe, even though it looks bad, just like childbirth, it looks bad and it hurts. But oh, what you get afterward. And I do believe we are giving birth to a much purer, much truer, much more joyful humanity. But we have to look at these things. We got to look under the covers. We got to look at sexism. We got to look at racism. We got to look at it. We got to own it. We got to let people give voice to it, talk about their pain, so that we can heal and move forward together.
Yep.
Before we close, one thing I do want to say, when I was talking about abortion as women, please think about what you're saying before you say it. If you're still very traditional religion, especially, this is one thing that really bothers me. a lot of women I know who did get abortions years ago, and then were able to go on and build wonderful careers for themselves. And when they were financially stable and older, then they started their families. And lo and behold, they get married, and then they decide they're going to become very religious. So now they're going to be anti-abortion and start supporting people who want to take or have taken that right away from other women. So if you were blessed and lucky enough to be pregnant in a time when you still had autonomy over your own medical decisions and got to choose whether or not you were ready to become a mother, have the decency, even if your beliefs have changed, have the decency to keep your mouth shut on these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Do the decent thing for your sisters and just be quiet. Let the religious right rave and rave about whatever. But if you benefited from something that has now been taken away from your sisters,
Mm-hmm.
if you can't support them, then just stay silent. Just
Mm-hmm.
stay silent.
Mm-hmm.
So, Siri, once again, love talking to you. I'm going to give you the last words, anything you'd like to close with, and please tell people how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, so you can look me up on siristrommen.com, and love to connect with you that way. I have other teachings and things that I do there as well. But I think the last word is that where we are trying to go as a humanity is towards greater empathy and compassion. And to get and break through that wall that we're in right now is extremely painful, like you said. But it's never bad when we choose empathy and compassion in any subject. It's never bad. So as we are going through this, if you're not sure and old beliefs and old questions start to come up and doubts, it's a great way to just say, what is the most loving, open, kind, empathetic response to this possible moment? And you're never going to be wrong.
Oh, I love that. Siri, thank you so much. I appreciate your input as always and look forward to our next discussion.
Absolutely. See you then.
Take care.